Is NATO finished? I don't know. But this is pretty interesting.
I hope so.
Elizabeth Voss, also from Consortium News, who's one of our Indie Media Award honorees. Yep, thank you. She was on Misty Winston's radio show the other night, on Friday night. You can check that out on tntradio.live. Find Misty's page. You can go to the listen backs. It's also on Spotify under TNT Radio. She will also be on Misty's show this Friday night. But she wrote this article about depleted uranium, and I know that Reef and Colin covered England and the UK sending depleted uranium to Ukraine and the war crime that is. But she wrote something about this too, about using using poison in Ukraine's depleted hope of victory. Like I said, the Media Award honoree. So, depleted uranium shells have been sent to Ukraine as confirmed by UK Armed Forces Minister James Heappey last week. Heappey. All those British names are weird. Britain announced last month that it would send the munitions for use with Challenger 2 tanks, a move that immediately escalated nuclear tensions with Russia, with President Vladimir Putin threatening to place tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus just days later. The saber rattling's a really good idea, guys. The UK move comes amid indications that Kiev is increasingly desperate to the point. I actually like the buttery chicken, to the point of being willing to risk
Chicken Kiev
scorching the earth it is fighting for. I think they kind of already did that in Bakhmut, or did Wagner. I don't know. Over the last few months, documents emerging as part of the so-called Pentagon leak, allegedly posted online by U.S. National Guardsman Jack Teixeira, have shown Ukrainian forces are faring far worse than previously reported by corporate media. Surprise, surprise! As reported by Consortium News, the leaked documents show the long-planned Ukrainian offensive will fail miserably. That's always nice to see, a long-planned offensive failing miserably. Kind of like their spring offensive that isn't really happening. That the conflict is not going well for Ukraine came as little surprise to those who had been following the story outside of the legacy press echo chamber. However,
I saw there was something from WAPO too that said something about the counteroffensive might not be what people expected. It was it's not going to be that good, guys. It was that.
They're definitely setting you up. But, however, Britain's decision to send depleted uranium rounds to Ukraine represents more than a dangerous escalation in the West's proxy war with a nuclear-armed power. It's an example of Ukraine's willingness to target the ethnic Russian population in eastern Ukraine and poison the land it's attempting to retain. Depleted uranium will have effects not only on Russian fighters, but also on the civilian population for years to come. Radio host Randy Credico, who recently visited the Donbass. Hey, we know him.
Recently visited Tara Reid.
He also recently did have an interview with Tara Reid. I was going to mention that afterwards. But Randy recently visited the Donbass, and he told Consortium News that residents of that region already live in daily fear of U.S.-made missiles used by Ukraine to target civilians and the emergency services that come to help them. Now, they're to face the additional prospect of depleted uranium shells, which would not simply kill civilians now, but has the potential to poison future generations. I know he discussed this with Tara
as it
on
has
her
done,
stream.
As it has done in Fallujah, specifically. Go look up that crap about what it did to children there. Right. They talked about it affected more people than Hiroshima, and like both the nuclear bombs. So.
And it caused all kinds of infertilities and stillborns and birth defects and horrible.
Yeah, it was bad.
And there are the Ukrainians in Donbass. That was in March 2015. After the siege or the initial Minsk Accords. Russia intervened in Ukraine after 8 years of war by Kiev. Kiev, against the ethnic Russians in the east, who declared independence from Ukraine after the U.S.-backed 2014 coup. The U.S. and British corporate media appeared to dismiss concerns of Russian nuclear escalation in response to the use of depleted uranium rounds, and the official line in the West is that such weapons represent a low environmental risk.
Yep.
There's also, and Tara's been talking about this, there was chatter among the community, whatever it was that she's connected to, that they were okay with a limited nuclear strike and they thought that it would not affect Americans, and Western Europe. Are they out of their minds? So we're going to get into the sordid history of its use. Yes, I know the answer is yes. However, there are compelling reasons to question the official stance. Depleted uranium rounds were used by U.S. forces in both Iraq wars as well as in the Balkans in the 1990s. Depleted uranium munitions are heavier than lead and are typically used to pierce the armor of tanks. On impact, the metal shears, burns, and vaporizes. This produces toxic radioactive dust. A 2001 report focusing on the health impacts of depleted uranium on U.S. veterans of the Gulf War, published by The Nation, explains that DU, depleted uranium, is highly toxic and, according to the Encyclopedia of Occupational Health and Safety, can cause lung cancer, bone cancer, and kidney disease. Scientists point out that depleted uranium becomes much more dangerous when it burns. When fired, it combusts on impact. As much as 70% of the material is released as a radioactive and highly toxic dust that can be inhaled or ingested and then trapped in the lungs or kidneys. Yay! Quote, "This is when it becomes most dangerous," says Arjun Makhijani, who is the president of the Institute for Energy and Environmental Research. It becomes a powder in the air that can irradiate you. Oh my God. A powder in the air that can irradiate you. Let me say that again. It becomes a powder in the air that can irradiate you. Thanks, depleted uranium. Thank you, UK. A 1999 report by the Guardian related the sentiments of scientists.
We also tested our depleted uranium munitions in Hawaii on Kilauea, right under that big telescope. By the way.
Nice.
So a bunch of the native people there are like upset at the health crisis it's caused. So yeah, good stuff. Right. So, and Florida's going to put depleted radioactive stuff in our roads. That's going to go real well.
Yep. Because Florida.
Yeah.
So a 1999 report by Guardian related the sentiments of scientists speaking in regards to bombing Kosovo with depleted uranium. Quote, "One single particle of depleted uranium lodged in the lymph node can devastate the entire immune system." Former UN weapons inspector Scott Ritter commented on the news of depleted uranium rounds being sent to Ukraine by citing increases in leukemia where it had previously been used in Kosovo, as well as increases in birth defects and cancer in Iraq following the wars there. Mentioned that before. This is sites identified by UN Environmental Program as targets for ordnance containing depleted uranium during NATO's 99 bombing of the former Yugoslavia. You see all those stars, and that's a lot of stars all over the map. Those are targeted sites. Yep. He argues, and that's Ritter, that the U.S. suppresses the health effects of depleted uranium because we don't want to take ownership for what we've done. In John Pilger's film, documenting Iraq after the first Gulf War, paying the price, killing the children of Iraq, he spoke with doctors in Basra, where they reported a 10-fold increase in cancer deaths. Pilger also spoke with an Iraqi pediatrician who described an influx of congenital deformities never before seen prior to the war.
I've seen that as well. Also, I do want to point out, because it pointed out when we talked about it, that Russia has also used rounds like this. But when I did my research, all I saw was rifle rounds with depleted uranium, which I think they argue that that's like, I think it was during the Balkans they were used, right? So, Yeah, I didn't know if tank rounds were a thing with that, which would have more uranium material, thus leaving more radioactive material. And I think they stopped using them because of the problems that they found with it. You know? So
that would make
there's
sense.
that.
That would make sense. There is that.
Yeah.
Um,
But generally it's just harder than tungsten, even though the Russians are using tanks that tungsten would easily pierce, which they've said. Like NATO has said that. Well, you're using old tanks. We can just use old stuff.
Yep.
So,
well, we're not giving them the new stuff, but actually now I believe we're starting to produce new stuff just to send to Ukraine, which is just awesome.
yeah.
Not really.
Yeah.
In the case of the Second Iraq War, the most striking reported effects of depleted uranium and other toxic substances were seen in Fallujah, where U.S. forces bombed mercilessly in 2004, as Reef mentioned earlier. The rise in birth defects in Iraq have been called catastrophic, and The Guardian went so far as to publish a piece in 2014 that accused the WHO of covering up the nuclear nightmare left behind in Fallujah by the U.S. and U.K. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's the depleted uranium in Hawaii that you talked about from 2018. This is a simulated DU training. Others...
Look at that. I know stuff.
Others have compared the city's health crisis with that following the U.S. nuclear attack on Hiroshima. Yay!
Yep.
The specific role of depleted uranium rounds in the sharply increased rate of cancer and serious birth defects remains controversial, but the accounts of doctors on the ground in Fallujah who have documented such birth defects, cancers, and other health problems are staggering. Is this the future faced by...
That's a lot of damage!
Yeah. Is this the future faced by generations of ethnic Russians in Ukraine? Well, they wouldn't.
Very
Ukrainians,
much so.
Kiev wouldn't call them ethnic Russians. They would call them Ukrainians. But when Ukraine is already set to lose, if slowly, on the battlefield, what's to be gained by taking out a few more Russian tanks if it permanently renders the land a danger to its inhabitants, permeated with toxic dust particles of radioactive heavy material? What are you fighting for at that point if you're destroying the land?
Let's go back to what Ukraine is. What resource does it produce?
Wheat.
What has gone up since we've... Yes. They are literally salting the earth right now with Europe's biggest breadbasket.
How can this decision be viewed as anything but a spiteful admission that that land is being lost and that salting it is a final act of malice against ethnic Russians in Donbass? The use of DU munitions in Ukraine amounts to a last gasp of desperation and an attempt to contaminate territory Kiev knows it will not regain, for such weapons would not be supplied by Britain and used by Ukraine on land they were confident they would recapture, because they wouldn't put their own citizens through that kind of poison.
Yep.
Support independent media. Elizabeth Voss is a freelance journalist, contributor, Consortium News. You can follow her on Twitter at Elizabeth Lee, Lea Voss. She's a badass. I love her. She recently followed me because she recently fixed that situation because I showed her, hey, how are you not following me at this point? Like, we've known each other for a while. She's like, oh, what?